Hello, everybody, and welcome back to GameDay Squad's Women's Aussie Rules Show. We are here to talk about some 2024 rankings for our Women's Aussie Rules game, of course, and I'm joined by my good friend and co-host in Bales. Bales, mate, are you ready to get into this episode and chop it all up?
Yeah, mate. Hey, I hope you're going well. Good. Looking forward to it. Look, I love that smooth transition when you just like, hello, everyone, and then you take the glasses off and put them to the side. That was a nice one to start the episode off. But now, keen to get into some player rankings, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. I almost forgot I had them on sometimes. They're not prescription, by the way. They're just to help me with looking at a screen all day. But, Bales, as I did with last week, I'm going to hit you with a little warm-up question, all right? So make sure you're ready, all right? Warm-up question is going to be this, Bales. Would you rather be able to know in fantasy that a player was going to perform really bad for the round? You could pick one player every round and it would tell you automatically, don't start them. This player's going to, stink it up. Or would you prefer the opposite and know who's going to be one of the highest scoring players for a particular round? So if you had the gift of being able to foresee into the future for one particular round, and you could either pinpoint the worst player that you should avoid or pinpoint a player you should start, which power are you choosing and why?
Yeah. Are we talking about Women's Aussie Rules? Is that what we're talking about?
Of course, mate. Or fantasy at that.
So I'm actually going to, a lot of people probably say go for, just want the points. Yep. Highest scoring player, whatever. I'm probably going to go for, I'd much rather take away the worst scoring player and know who that's going to be, because if it's an injury impacted game, I'd like to know that, because if it's someone that's in my squad, I could take them out and put someone else in. But because I feel like I've got, or that I'm trying to have the best squad available anyway, I feel like these players are really going to score high as it is. So I want the player that, if one of those players is going to score poorly, and maybe if it's an injury impacted game or anything else, or they might be sick on the dart, I want to know and then remove them. So that's probably where the path I'd go down. But I know a lot of people probably actually pick that they'd want to get the high scoring player, because at the end of the day, we all want points. So,
well, mate, the chat is actually only if it's a popular player. And JJ's saying worst for sure. Well, yeah, we'll make it so it's a good player, so you know to avoid a good player that most others would probably start in their squad. We have another going with the worst. And it's funny that...
Surprisingly, I thought most people would actually go for, they want the high scoring player to get the points on the board, but it seems like most people they'd want to know the worst player. So fair enough.
Yeah, and I actually agree with you, Bales. So maybe it's not so irregular to think that. Maybe people just want the security of knowing a massive avoid for a round so that you can build your squad out from there. So, yeah. But we've had someone else come in.
Oh, I like that. That's a good answer.
A GameDay Squad. Goat at that. Fairs. I would take the best and stack up on rarity cards.
So that's a very good call. Very good call.
Yeah. Well, feel free as we tick along, if you have just joined, to let us know. What would you prefer? Would you prefer to know the worst player for a round and avoid, or the best player for a round so you can load up like Fairs? But let's get into a giveaway. Bales, we're running on GameDay Squad. Now, I'm pretty sure this is a card that most people, if not everyone, is going to want. It is a All-Star Kate Hoare from the 2023 season. And all you have to do to be eligible to win this is this. You need to go to GameDay Squad's YouTube channel, subscribe to GameDay Squad, and leave a like on the live stream. Secondly, leave a comment of your squad name and let us know why you want this Kate Hoare All-Star for your squad. And that's it. Those simple steps will give you an entry into the competition. And at the end of the preseason and the start of the fantasy season at that, we're going to be pulling out the winner. You can comment one time per preseason video we did. And Bales, we've already done one, which means if you want to go back and put another submission in, you're more than welcome to, but you're capped at one per video. So definitely get in while you can. And whilst you're there, get Bales and what he's doing at Fantasy Fanatic. Give him a sub as well. He deserves it. He's here all season long to give you your fantasy content. So get onto his channel as well whilst you're doing so, and show some love, because he definitely deserves it.
Thanks, mate. Very much appreciated. And reciprocate and subscribe and follow all the GameDay Squad stuff. It's good fun.
Absolutely, Cap Bales. Let's get into it without further ado. We're going to get into our defender ranking, starting off from 10 to 6. And we're going to do this for all our rankings. So we're going to go 10 to 6, we'll go 5 to 1, and then we'll change the position and talk about it after. But Bales, I might open up the floor to you. I've done a little bit of talking. Talk to me through some of your ranks here and why you're so high on this player.
Yeah, so, well, firstly, obviously, I said the play you've got at 10. I had Ella Heads at 11. It was between her and Maddie Newman for my top 10 spot. So I end up going for Maddie Newman, just purely based on the fact that playing at the Crows, obviously, Crows are one of sort of the top teams, obviously, for in my own heart, but then also just generally on the ladder, obviously been very successful. And I just think that she's the main distributor coming out of the back line, given that run and carry for the Crows. So I think she'll be a really good player, and I think that she could be someone that she's not in the top 5 rankings, and that you won't play her every week. But I think definitely with some matchups, you can definitely look at playing her. And obviously, if you don't have all of the top 5 or 6, then she might well be in your top 5 or 6 defenders that you play on a weekly basis. Then I got Tani Evans at 9. She's probably got the ability to be in the top 5, to be honest. She's got a great game playing in defense, being that interceptor. She's got a great kick. It's just that Giants love putting her forward. They love swinging her forward for some unknown reason. I know that they just keep swinging the magnets around and playing people in different positions. So Tani Evans, that's why she's a bit lower, but I still do like her. Then I got Tilly Lucas right at number 8. So they're moving back into a defensive role this season. So being a midfielder in previous years, even at the Saints as well, when they were there, I think that she. I think they're going to have a very good year, a strong year, and that's why I've got them in the top 10. Then I've got Georgia Stathis at number 7, the name that Tom loves to try and say.
Oh gosh, don't try to get me to say it again.
So the Bulldogs, I don't think are going to be struggling a bit this season, and I think expect the ball to be back there a lot. And we've seen that George Stathis moving into that defensive role more last year. Obviously, I'm pretty sure she's just a midfielder in GameDay Squad last year, but now as a defender, I think she could be a really good scorer this year. And then I've got Beck Webster running outside the bottom 5 of the top 10. She's one again that could easily, I could see her being in the top 5 going into next season, for the season. Playing a bit of a mixture of getting some CBAs, but then playing in defense as well. So sort of splitting your time sort of a bit there. A little bit sort of, I guess the one that comes to mind is maybe like a Christian Salem has done at parts throughout the year for the men's, where he's played a bit of midfield, then gone back in defense. A bit like that, I think, for Beck Webster. So I expect her to be a pretty solid scoring defender this season. Maybe not going to be a top 5 and hit the ceilings that I think some of the other players will talk about soon. But I think she'll be sort of safe and solid and could easily be your D5, D6 for the whole season, and you'll be pretty happy.
Yeah, absolutely. Have to agree with some of that there. Speaking of, you said Heads was your 11 and Newman snuck into your top 10. I'm literally just the opposite. I did sort of like wanted to build it out so I could see, just to let you know, to compare, for some of the picks. And funnily enough, yes, Newman was my number 11. I gave the nod to Heads. My Swans goggles on, maybe. But I do think Ella Heads does have a lot of upside.
I think it's fitting. I'm a Crowie. I got Maddie Newman at number 10. You're a Swanee, and you got Ella Heads at number 10. So I reckon it's quite fitting.
Mate, it's almost destiny if you put it at that. But look, Ella Heads has some really good upside. And I think she finished, she finished her 2023 campaign very strong. I know at the start of the season, she didn't exactly score some big scores, and she wasn't the player that we thought she would be. Like Lucy McAvoy was in that mix. It's almost like she was playing a little bit better, but towards the end of the year, it just seemed like Ella Head started to get it going and really found her role within the Swans and was super comfortable in doing so. She's taking a good chunk of the kick-ins as well, so there's definitely that upside. And I loved what I saw late in the season. I think she's going to be a defender that you're going to want to stream through your squads at some points this season, which is hence why I have her in my top 10, but she didn't quite crack that top 7 mark, that those top defenders in my eyes, because we have seen that at times she can play, her fantasy floor, unfortunately, is a little low, but she definitely has a good ceiling and has to be a consideration for me for this season. Number 9 for me, Emma O'Driscoll. Freo, they've got some injuries. They're really going to start to lean on some of their better players. And O'Driscoll was definitely one of those last season. She, as well, was in some fantastic form. She just got snubbed out of our All-Star squad. She was pretty close to making it, though. So it just goes to show and indicate how good she was. But I'm having her in the top 7 or top 10 again. Her for number 9 for me, again, pretty similar to Heads. And this will be a bit of a theme for some positions for me. These are just really high upside plays that in some rounds you're going to want to start, in others you're going to want to avoid and look at some of that matchup matrix. Number 8 for me. And if I'm not mistaken, I actually don't know if you have this player in your rankings. We're going with Chantel Emerson.
Yeah, no, I don't. I'll just quickly say before you go on about Chantel Emerson while she's in your top 10. The only reason I don't have her is because Beck Webster missed a few games at the start of the season last year. And I just feel like Emerson will probably take a slight dip. And I think Beck Webster's sort of scoring will go up as well, and being a bit more relevant as a defender. But I would have Emerson probably at number 12 if I was doing sort of outside of the top 10. So Emerson's still a good pick. But why do you like her for this upcoming season? She had a pretty good one last year.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is a player that did crack into the All-Star squad for 2023. So you can pull one of her All-Stars in an All-Star pack, which we'll be opening some later. Hopefully, Bales, we can be lucky and maybe we'll see an All-Star. And but Emerson's an option.
Love opening packs. Just I remember talking to Cal on the phone. We're just having a bit of a chat and catch up, and just saying how opening packs on GameDay Squad. Just brings back the nostalgia of opening footy packs as a kid, or a FIFA as well in the teenage years, and opening there. So it just gives that sort of, it's like a that rush of when you open it. Just it's a good feeling. So looking forward to it.
It is good, especially when you can get a gold Ash Riddell like you did last week in your pack, mate. That was a fantastic pull and little addition to the squad, which I have a feeling you might
today.
You want an offie?
Yeah.
You want an offie?
Yeah.
Okay, well, Emerson, why I'm so high? Well, she has a pretty good fantasy floor. If you have a look at some of the numbers from last season, she averaged 11 kicks per game. She does have the kicking duties, and hopefully she will maintain that for Geelong. I think that's going to be a big consideration into her season and how well it will be. If she can, be that person for Geelong and that player, then I do think she's going to have a pretty similar year to what we saw last season. She had an average of 73 fantasy points. I guess somewhere where she can improve. She only averaged 2 marks per game, and I think that's just a play style thing. If we can see Emerson get a couple more marks and be a little bit more involved, we could see that score creep into the 80s. But I have a feeling that won't be happening. But a pretty safe 73 to 70 fantasy points per game, I'm feeling for Emerson this season. And at some points this year, that's going to be a start in your squad. So that's my reasoning. Having her number 8, Tani Evans, number 7. I think you nailed it on the head with her, Bales. Some weeks she's going to be one of the best defenders in the competition, and we're going to be thinking set and forget. And then other weeks, the Giants are going to have other plans, and just use her like let's call it like a Bonnie Too Good, but just doesn't have that same fantasy output where Bonnie Too Good can play anywhere and score well on the ground. Tani Evans seems to only score well when she is in that defender spot. But she averages nearly around 12 and a half kicks per game. She gets her hands on the footy a lot, especially when she's given the opportunity. Just averaged under 80 points per game last season in GameDay Squad, and about 80% time on ground as well. So she's going to get bulk minutes. She's going to have bulk opportunity to score well. And Tani Evans is well deserving of the number 7 spot, in my opinion, which would be a bench spot in my All-Star squad. And number 6, Ruby Schleicher. You actually made comment about Schleicher last week saying, don't look too much into last season. Of course, it was injury riddled. It wasn't a good representation of what Schleicher is actually about. The numbers would say don't start her, only an average of 56 fantasy points. But we've seen in years prior what she can do. We haven't seen that in GameDay Squad. This is going to be her first year where she could truly dominate on the GameDay Squad platform, and I'm predicting an all-star squad finish for Schleicher this season and an absolute must-start as a defender. She's going to get her hands on the ball a lot. They're going to want to utilize her and her skill set, and she's well-deserving. A pretty safe number 6 option, in my opinion.
Yep, agreed.
Well, let's get into our top defenders, and Here we go. Defender rankings 5-1. And I was actually corrected. Fez said O'Driscoll actually made the All-Star squad. I thought she wasn't in, but there you go. So that's how good she is. And speaking of O'Driscoll, why don't you take the floor here in your top 5? So you're thinking very much the same to last season.
Yeah, good segue, that one. I just think Emma O'Driscoll's just that she's arguably Fremantle's probably one top or at least second most important player this season. She's obviously gets her hands on the ball a lot from the defensive half, and we've mentioned before, I think, again, Freo are going to struggle a bit this season as well. So I think that she's just going to continue to rack up. Obviously, she loves kicking the ball, gets plenty of kicks as well. So I expect her to be one of those top scoring players once again. 4 and 3, I probably had a bit of a sort of a think of where I put Emma Carney and Ruby Slisher, but I went for Emma Carney at 4. Again, just ever reliable, right? She's been one of the top defenders in every year of Women's Aussie Rules on GameDay Squad, but then also before we did Women's Aussie Rules on GameDay Squad, even just in the other format, she's been the top 1 or 2 defender pretty much every year she's played. So multiple Australian, and I think she's going to have a very strong season once again. I think Nicole Bresnahan, who we didn't have in our top 10s, but I think she'll take on a little bit more of the, I guess, market share back there of points. So I think Carney's ceiling might not be as much, but I think she's just going to be a safe, reliable option week in, week out. And I think if you've got her, she's just pretty much got to be in the lineup most weeks.
100%. Yeah.
Ruby Slisher, I've got at number 3. I think, again,
wow, let's go.
She's been the number 1 scorer. I think she was number 1 scoring defender a couple of seasons ago as well. Obviously had an injury interrupted year last year, but I expected to bounce back and be one of those main sort of players coming out of defensive 50 for Collingwood. We know that she played midfield in her last full season, where she was mostly midfielder with Bree Davey and Britt Bonucci being out. So I think that I think Ruby Slisher will be has always got the ability to go in the midfield, right? But I think she'll be mainly a defender this season, so I think her scoring will be quite solid. And then my top 2, I think, are clearly my top 2 this year. And I've got Charlie Thomas at number 2, just purely based on all the kicking she's going to get. West Coast, again, we know are going to struggle as well. And that's a bit of a theme with a couple of these defenders as well, that a few of these defenders with struggling teams, they're going to get all the ball. Charlie Thomas was the number 1 scoring defender last year. I think she's going to be upwards of the top sort of 2, potentially 3 this season. So, and she could easily be the top scoring defender. But I do have Isla Sheeran at number 1. And the reason I've got her at number 1 is we saw in the final round of last year, she went into the midfield. And Tom, I don't know if you've got the actual points she scored in the final round last season, but she played midfield and she looked really good, changed the way that Richmond played. They look really good. It even elevated like a Monconti and Grace Egan, the players around her. And I think it changed the way that I think Richmond are going to go this season. I think they're going to go really strongly, be one of those teams. I think they could even finish top 4. So, and if she's playing midfield, I think that if you've got a player playing essentially mostly midfield as a defender, that's what you're after, right? So that's why 100%. She's sitting as my number 1 spot.
Absolutely love it, Bales, mate. Carney, I can't agree with you more. She's going to be the safest defender, or one of the safest defenders for the season. She doesn't have a high ceiling like the players like Sheeran, like Thomas, like O'Driscoll, even at that. But she just has such a good fantasy floor. We know what her role is. She's just been such a safe bet, which feels like forever for Women's Aussie Rules. And she's going to continue to be that this season for North Melbourne. So that's why she's earned a top 5 spot for me. Elizabeth, I'm looking at a little bit of upside here. We spoke about her last week in the defenders being changed in some of the positions. Well, for her, she only had 11.6 kicks in average, but she gets 5 handballs a game. She nearly averages 20 disposals, 4 marks, nearly 4 tackles, and would have had an average of 82 fantasy points last season. If she rolled that into this season, she would be a top 7 defender. So what I'm hoping for is a very similar role and very similar upside for her this season. And that's why I have her at number 4, because I am looking at that upside and giving her a bit of a boost compared to maybe some of the safer options in Kearney right on top of her. Sheeran, I think you said it really well. I guess it depends on where she's going to play. I know Richmond, they've made a couple moves in the off-season. And Sheeran, she's in the midfield. She's going to be maybe the number 1 defender that you put there. But even if she plays as defense, she's still the number 3 in my eyes. She's just so electric and so good off the defend. Coming out of defense for me, that she gets really high disposal rate. She had an average last season of 85 fantasy points per game. She knows how to get her hands on the footy. She knows how to lay a tackle as well, having an average of 5 per game, even as a defender. So if you take all that input and take all that upside into the midfield, then wow, she could have a stellar year. But I guess I've ranked her based as a defender because that's where I think she's going to play. But Bales, as you mentioned, there's definitely a lot of upside there. Number 2, which might be my favorite defender and fantasy defender, Thomas from the West Coast Eagles. Charlotte Thomas is an absolute stud. And my goodness, did she look good on the weekend in her trial game. She is just she's an anchor for the team. She had an average of 87 fantasy points per game last season. She kicks the ball on average 14 times just about. She is going to get bulk footy. She's going to, and we even saw her sometimes last season late go up forward and kick some goals. I don't know if you remember that, but that was quite funny as well. But mate, so all those reasons there, Charlotte Thomas, absolute number 2 for me, and I'm loving her season. And Tilly Lucas-Rod as a defender this year in GameDay Squad. Speaking of someone who knows how to find the footy, this is definitely one of those candidates right here, an average of 98 fantasy points per game last season. I'm thinking a very similar role, and that is why I have her at the number 1 rank. She's going to get CBAs, supposedly get a good chunk of midfield minutes, and that, exactly as Bale said, is the upside that you want in your fantasy defenders. So I'm banking on that being the same in 2024, and why she's going to hold my number 1 spot. She has the most upside and a really good floor, and I think is well deserving.
Yeah, agreed.
Alrighty, Buzz. That wraps us up. Our defenders.
Beautiful.
Pretty similar rankings. Had some players in some different spots. How did you feel? Feel good?
Yeah, good. Yeah, good. I'm looking forward
Excellent.
to the midfields now.
Now, the midfielders, this is where, the money is made. Our highest averaging players in fantasy. And we're going to kick it off, Bales, with our 10 to 6 rankings. Talk to me, Bales, about some of these players, why they've cracked into your top 10 and what you're expecting this season.
Yeah, so a few of the players here, it's sort of I can see a few similarities already. So I got Maddie Prasparkas at 10. I just expect her to have another strong year for the Bombers. I think the Bombers have got a pretty nice run to start the year as well. So I think she's a good player to have as even your bench midfielder, depending on sort of what other players you have in your club. I think with those good matchups, you can take advantage of that. Elise Parker at 9. She's the main Giants midfielder there. Plays high game time as well, which is obviously a massive bonus as well, especially as a midfielder, right? If you're playing that. And a lot of these midfielders do play high time on ground, but there were games where Elise Parker played 100% game time last year, which was crazy. So I think she can have another strong year. She is the tag target, though, which is probably why I've got her down towards the bottom part of the 10. Yep. I expect to have another big year. Georgia Prasparkas at number 8. We know she's got as big a ceiling as pretty much any player there is, maybe besides Marinoff and Agana, but they're probably like 2 of the top couple of ones, right? So, but Georgie, the areas I probably got a bit lower as well is just the fact that I think you've got Amy McDonald, you've got Nina Morrison, you got Beg Webster will go through there, you got Darcy Malone. There's a few names through there that can roll through. Now, I don't see every one of these players like averaging really well, so that's probably why I don't know if a ceiling is necessarily going to be there as frequent. So she can still hit it. She still will hit it a couple of times this year, but I don't know if it's going to be as frequent. So that's why she's a bit lower. Then we move over to one of my favorites, Anne Hatchard. The bias in me wanted to put her up at number 2 behind Marinoff, but being sort of taking my Crows goggles off, I think she's in for another strong year. And I could easily see her being a top 5 midfield this year. I think there were 2 games last year where she got injured against the Bulldogs, and she was well over 100 game day squad points in about 3 quarters. And she got injured late in the 3rd quarter and didn't play. I think she might not have even played any of the last, or if it was only a couple minutes. So to be over 100 points in 3 quarters is amazing. And then obviously could have been a lot more. Then against Brisbane, I think she got a bit of attention, but also was carrying that injury. I think she got hit in the head as well and got a blood nose or something like that, or a cut in her head, so she had to come off. So I think she's probably sort of in other formats, people are looking at her as underpriced. But I think in GameDay Squad, people look at her average and go, I don't think it's like as good as one of the top 5, but I think she could easily crack her way into the top 5. I've just got her just outside at the moment. And then Ash Riddell, just knows how to find the footy. Had 38 touches on the weekend in a practice game, which is crazy. And apparently I heard on the free kick pod they were saying that apparently they told Ash Riddell don't go like 100%, like don't try, and she could still get 38 touches, so it's crazy. So I've got them as my 5, so I'm liking all those. And the funny thing when you'll talk about the mids as well, right, is that there's probably 15 players that can be in your squad any week, right? Like you only got 5 spots plus a bench spot. It's just funny. You could put like 10, 15 players in each week. So it's going to be, that's probably where a lot of the points might be won and lost for coaches this year, is if they can get those ceiling scores.
Yeah, mate, totally agree. Well, I actually want to talk about someone firstly I don't have in mind, and that's going to be Hatcher, your girl from the Crows. I don't have her in my top 10, and I want to explain
invalid.
why. Now, I do think some weeks, as you said, she's going to crack in. We saw that last year. She's one of the top players, but she had an average of 119 fantasy points, and this is considering the 2 injury games. So the average actually is quite tasty when you put those together. My big thing, if she could have an AFL comparison, it's Tom Green. She can be a massive handball merchant some games, and in a platform where we favour kicking with 4 points, it can really hurt her fantasy ceiling. And
good point.
There will just be some games where she'll have 30 disposals, but 22 of them will be handballs. And it just really brings down that sort of upside that she has. When she can kick the ball, we've seen that she can crack that 130, 150 game day squad score quite easily. But more often than not, she's going to handball the ball a little bit more. Then she's going to kick it. It's going to affect her fantasy ceiling, as I mentioned. And I'm just going to look at upside elsewhere personally, because I think in a season, I know people were saying before there are plenty of good defenders. Let's get this comment up. I actually think the midfielders are super stacked this year. And there are some top-heavy midfielders, but after sort of my top 5, I feel like it gets really close in the terms of rankings and trying to differentiate between who's going to be in my squad and not.
Yeah.
But now that that's out of the way, let's talk about my top 10. And I'm going to start off with Ellie Blackburn. She, like a player last season I was talking about, she finished the year really strong. She really found her form late, and her averages are quite nice. Even in a season where I thought she started off pretty slow and could have been better, 117 fantasy points per game with 15.7 kicks, 11 handballs, 4 marks, 4 tackles. She truly does it all for the Western Bulldogs and is a great candidate to crack in my top 10 midfielders for this season. But wanted to keep her there because I think upside-wise, she's just not as good as some of the others in front of her. And the Prasparkas twins or sisters, sorry, they are some of the greatest players in terms of upside that you'll find. But Bales, I really liked your point about at least Georgie Prasparkas. Geelong has a really stacked midfield, and they got a lot of players who are going to get their hands on the ball. And that is one thing that's keeping her up out of my top rankings for this season, is that we are going to see some lull games and some floor games from her. But there are going to be other times of the year where we're talking about Georgie Prasparkas as being one of the best fantasy and dynasty assets to have in Game Day Squad. And I still think as a player card, it's an absolute must grab for your squad.
Yeah, agreed.
Prasparkas.
I just realised I probably should have put Elise Parker at either 8 or 10, so I could have had the same as you, having the Prasparkas sisters back-to-back at the rankings.
Yeah, there's not much splitting them, in all honesty. But what is splitting, in my opinion, Madison Prasparkas to Georgie, is that Maddie Prasparkas just demands a little bit more, or she is demanded of a lot more for her team. There aren't as many ball winners. There definitely are still. Essendon do have, 2 good, couple other players in that midfield, but Maddie is just their best midfielder, in my opinion, and she's going to step up more times than not. She's going to have a really good average this season, and she's going to find the footy. And speaking of her averages, I can get them up here. 13 kicks per game, 13 handballs per game, 5 tackles, 115 fantasy point average last season. She's just a ball winner, and she's going to tackle hard, and she's going to continue to play that role for Essendon, which is why she's sitting there at number 8 and just a little bit ahead of her sister. But not much. I don't know if that's bragging rights or not. But let's get into the giant that I picked. I missed out on Parker. I love your points about Parker. She's GWS's best player, and she definitely gets the most attention from other teams. So she's respected as their best player. But I think one of the greatest dynasty assets you can possibly have in GameDay Squad right now is Zali Goldsworthy. And although she is a midfielder in 2024 for GameDay Squad, I don't think that's going to impact her ceiling that she has. We saw her out of the top 5 fantasy scores last season score 2 of them. The only person that topped her in points was Marinoff. And I don't think that's going to come to a surprise for anyone. She had a single game that was higher scoring than Goldsworthy, but she took out number 2 and number 3 for that place. Her upside is just monstrous. And speaking of upside, Goldsworthy had 98.4% time on ground last season.
Yeah.
She had 113 fantasy point game average, 10 kicks per game, 8 handballs, 7 tackles, and 1.6 goals per game. I'm not exactly sure what her role is going to be this year because late last season, Parker was out with an injury. It felt like Goldsworthy stepped into that role for her. She became a ball-dominant player, and we saw her fantasy points spike in that point. Is she going to be playing like that? Is she going to be playing as a forward? I don't exactly know. I do think there'll be some midfield and a midfield role for her. But even despite that, her upside is just ginormous, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Is a player that I scared.
Yeah, and I guess the reason I just have a sort of don't have her in my top 10 at the moment is just probably that uncertainty, right? Is that I don't know if it's a bit like Ella Roberts. Is she going to spend big chunks forward? Because I know Giants, again, are going to be one of those teams that will struggle a little bit as well. Obviously, mentioned when I was speaking about Tani Evans. So it's like, is Goldsworthy just going to be a player that she's going to be wherever the ball is? If that's in the forward line, she's going to stay there. She's going to go in the mids. Or is it going to be where she might have patches of the game where she'll be quiet? So that's probably my only concern. She was a forward. I'd 100% should be top 5, be probably one of the most sought after cards in the game this season. But into obviously Dynasty, she's still going to be one of those top cards. So I think she'll have another strong year.
Yeah, love it, man. Love it. And my last one, Mon Conti, All-Star squad member from last season, cracked into our top 6 scoring midfielders. And I see the exact same happening again this year, sliding in at the number 6 spot. She had 126 average in fantasy score per game. 91% time on ground, but she's just a ball winner. 15.9 kicks, 12.6 handballs, and 5.8 tackles just to top it all off. Richmond might struggle at times this season, but someone that won't struggle, in my opinion, is Mon Conti. I think she's going to be a really safe play. Some weeks, she's got a really good fantasy floor, and I just see her being such a safe bet to put in your top 6 midfielders for any round, really, despite matchups. So I'm loving Mon Conti this season, and she's at that number 6 spot for me. Alrighty, Bales, let's get into our top 5. Might be the most important top 5 for the season, and hopefully we've nailed some of our picks here. But you're a little bit more high on Conti than me at number 5, mate. Why don't you start it off and talk about your top 5 midfielders?
Yeah, so, looking at our top 6, we've only got 2 differences, and they're the same 6 players. It's just the fact that Riddell and Conti are sort of in.
Swapped?
You've just got, swapped, and then Gardner and Rowbottom are swapped. So it's quite interesting,
Yep.
but obviously the top 2 are pretty set. So, Mon Conti, I think that last year we saw her actually take a fair step up from her scoring. I think she's again, still such a young player, and she's just a fantastic athlete. Obviously, she's a great netballer as well. Sorry, no, not netball, basketball. Sorry, not netball. Apologies for that. No, basketballer. And she's obviously an amazing footballer as well, obviously winning the W Award last year. And I think with Sheeran going into the midfield this year, I think that's just going to help her even more because Sheeran, having another explosive player next to her, teams are going to go, it's going to be a bit like when you look at the men's teams and you see, like at Port, you got Butters and Rosie. It's like, who do you target? It's like you look at Richmond's AFLW team and you got Conti and Sheeran. Who are you going to put the attention to? It's probably going to go to Conti, but you can't just go, yep, she's the number 1 in there and the Oz one, like maybe an Elise Parker is in the Giants midfield or an Ellie Blackburn is at the Dogs, and more talking when Goldsworthy's forward. So, but Mon Conti, I think, is going to take another step up this year. So I'm a big fan of her this season. I've got Laura Gardner at 4. We obviously saw how amazing she was last year. She's now going to be just a straight mid and no forward status this year, which makes it a bit more interesting in GameDay Squad this year. But I still think she'll be a top sort of 5 or 6 midfielder. And I've got her at number 4 because of, she's an absolute ball magnet. I got Charlie Rowbottom at 3, and she's someone that I feel if there's going to be a challenger to Marinoff and Garner, I think Rowbottom's going to be that player, just because we know how much of a beast Charlie Rowbottom is. She just finds the ball, she gets marks, she tackles, she can go forward and take a big pat mark. She reminds me a little bit of like a Bont in the AFLW, just so much bigger and stronger than players around her. So I think she's going to have a massive year. I think Gold Coast got a pretty nice runner, so I like her as well. So, and then the last two don't really need too much discussion, right? Jazz Garner at 2 and Marinoff at number 1. We know how good they are. Average, obviously, in excess of 130-point average in GameDay Squad. They're the 2 premium assets across the game this year once again. And I think Marinoff being arguably the number 1 asset, just of the ceiling she's got, as you said before, getting the top score last year. And I think she's going to be another player that's going to have another strong year along with Garner once again. So, yep, I am a big fan of both those players.
Yeah. I want to, for everyone watching right now, do you have the same or similar top 5 to us? Let us know. Does North and Garner lock out your 1 and 2 spot like Bales? And if they do, who are the players that you're picking after? Because I do think there's a great debate. And Ash Riddell, my number 5 player, she is just such a high disposal, high ball winner that I think she's deserving of the spot for me. And I'm seeing much of the same this season for her. An average of 17 kicks per game. It's the 3rd highest out of all the midfielders. We have mentioned 12 handballs, 5 tackles, and 129 fantasy points. She does only have 78% time on ground, which I know that sounds like a lot, but is actually quite low in comparison to a lot of these elite midfielders that we're talking about right now. So, in my opinion, there's even room for her to get to even another and a higher level than she did last season. She can spend a bit more time there. But she's explosive. She's a great ball user, and North are going to want to make sure the ball's back in her hands when they're trying to win it all this season. And that's why she's locked out number 5 for me. Charlie Rowbottom, mate, if you're talking about a great candidate to take out, the number 1 spot, or at least challenge for the top spot, well, she definitely was doing that in her preseason game on the weekend. She had 29 disposals, 10 tackles, and 8 clearances in only 3 quarters of play.
Ridiculous.
That is already a massive ton and probably 130-point fantasy point outing in 3 quarters. She is truly in mid-season form from what it looks like on the weekend. So this could be a really, really fantastic year for Rowbottom and can be a scary season for coaches who don't have a Charlie Rowbottom. I'm super safe. I think it's super safe play to put her in my top 5, and I am stoked for the season she's about to have. But I think my top 3 is still deserving to be in front. Starting with Laura Gardner. Mate, Laura Gardner, one of my favorite players, of course. I am a Swans fan, so my Swans goggles might come on a little bit here. But 14 kicks, 15 handballs, 9 tackles per game. That is the 2nd highest out of any of the players we've spoken about so far. 131 fantasy point average, just edging out Charlie Rowbottom by 0.1 of a point. So over the season, there wasn't much splitting them, in all honesty. But I think Gardner, for me, she's just going to have the same type of season. That was her first season with the Swans in a new system last year, and we saw the way that they want to utilize her. They are going to be relying on Laura Gardner to win the ball. She's going to have Morford back in the ruck this season, and she's going to be spending a good chunk of her time, if not all of her time in the midfield. She had 88% time on ground last year. Gardner is such a safe play, in my opinion, for a top 6 finish in GameDay Squad this year. Another all-star appearance, despite going from the forward line to the midfield. And the only thing, touch wood, is, of course, staying healthy, and that's with all of these players. The top 2, though, I think these are just set and forget, in my opinion. I don't know if there's a single round where I'm even going to consider streaming one of them out. We have Garner with an average of 146 and Noffy with an average of 150. Noff had the highest fantasy score in a single game last year. She had the highest average score out of all players last season. Noff is just, and Bales, you're going to love to hear it, she's the GOAT. She's just the GOAT. She's just the fantasy GOAT and is an absolute must start in your squad. So, yeah, look, if you don't have a Noffy card, it's probably the first card I would try to get for my squad. If my squad started from scratch and I had to get one player first to get it all kickstarted, Ebony Marinoff is the top of that list for me, and Garner a pretty close second.
Yeah, and if you don't have a Marinoff as well, there are going to be a lot of people out there that have got a silver, even a gold, or even a platinum Marinoff in there. If you're playing the classic comp, which is what the main one, sort of, like both of us play, is that if you haven't got one, not only are you missing out on Marinoff score, but you're also missing out on the score being multiplied with a lot of people. So yeah, I think you just have to have, even if it's a bronze, just grab Marinoff if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Hello there. That's a little comment. Welcome to the stream. Want to talk about some women's Aussie Rules fantasy? If you've got any questions for the season upcoming, definitely feel free to ask. But I think, I think it's enough said on those two there, Garner, Knopf. They're just going to be the best fantasy players this season, and they're absolute must-starts in your squad. And fortunately for me, I do have both. I'm very glad. Very grateful that I have both, because they're the two top cards going into the season, for sure. For sure. Bales, let's get into our ruck rankings. We only did our top fives for this because, it isn't as deep, this position. You're sort of going to want to stick with your top guns for this one throughout the season. But I'm interested to hear, Bales, your top five rucks and why you're so big on them for the season.
Yeah, well, the first thing I would say, Tom, is you've actually got my my 2 and 3 mixed around, because I had Morpher at 2 and Mimstrom at 3.
Apologies.
But yeah, I think that obviously with rucks in GameDay Squad, you're probably looking at mainly at, obviously you can only put 2 in your squad, right? So it's probably only 2 or 3 you're looking at. So I think Sabrina Frederick and Matilda Schultz, I think, are going to have good solid years, and I think they could be matchup rucks if let's say an Alice Edmonds and Ali Morfitt, right, playing against each other, and you maybe only want one of them in your side, then you can put maybe a Sabrina Frederick or a Matilda Schultz. They got a good matchup on your bench. So I like both. I do have Mimstrom at 3. I think she's just solid, safe, and I still think there's a little bit of room for growth there as well. So I think that she'll be, again, the solo ruck. On your tile, we'll chop out every now and again for Freo, but I think she'll be the main ruck there. And then I had a hard time splitting Ali Morfitt and Alice Edmonds. I went for Alice Edmonds just ahead because I think she's got, I think I heard somewhere, it might have even been Jaden was telling me as well when we were chatting on our podcast, was saying Alice Edmonds hasn't got a negative matchup, I don't think, this season. I think she's got a positive matchup in every week, which is the reason I have her at number 1 and I've got Ali Morfitt at 2. But we saw last year Ali Morfitt being the number 1 scoring ruck in GameDay Squad. So I could easily see that happening again. I think Edmonds and Morfitt are quite close. So I think having both in your squad is a good idea, having one on the field and one on the bench. But that's why I've currently got Edmonds just ahead of Ali Morfitt. I've got Edmonds 1 and Morfitt at 2.
Yeah, for sure, mate. And for me, Scholes, definitely a streamable ruck. Isn't one I'm going to be setting and forgetting, hence why I've got her at 5. But I will say, from my rankings, at least in particular, from 5 to 2, there is not much splitting them in terms of average from last season. There's only 2 fantasy points that splits my 5th place to my 2nd place in terms of average per game last year, which I think just goes to show how good some of the options will be throughout this season and why you're going to want to stream some of these players through that 2nd ruck spot. I have my Swans goggles on at number 1. I'll get into that later. But I think it's for very, very good reason. But Scholes, really safe play. At times last year, we saw her be the top scoring ruck. And I do see that happening again in some moments of this season.
And it's only a first year last year as well, by the way.
Spot on. And there's just not going to be much competition with her splitting a role or anything. Scholes just seems like the absolute number 1 ruck at Port. I think I want to continue to roll her out through that role. Edmonds, for me, finished the season really strong last year, I must say. Definitely brought her average up because I did think she started a bit slow, at least for her standard. But I do see her getting back to some of her best this season. She did miss a game, though, but with only 1 missed game, an average of 87 fantasy points, which is the 3rd highest out of the list. I'm thinking a very, very good season for her again. One thing she definitely can do to take her game to the next level is that in my top 5, she averages the least amount of kicks for all the rucks. And she has an average of only 3.7 per game. The next lowest is Mim Strong at 5.1. One thing she can do, though, is handball the ball, which is at 7.5. I think that if Edmonds goes to the next level and cracks into that number 2 or number 3 spot for me, I need to see her get her hands on the ball a little bit more and to kick the ball a little bit more. And we could see those fantasy points get well into the 90s for average. So some very good upside for her this year and very reasonable and achievable expectation. In my opinion, Mim Strom started the season last year as the best ruck, finished a little bit slower, but you know what? She was fantastic. She's going to be really safe to play in your squads, an average of 5 kicks, nearly 7 handballs, and can win a hit out as well. 25 per game for last season. I don't think I need to say much more about her, but what I do want to talk about is my top 2. Sabrina Frederick, Ali Morfitt. Frederick was like one of the safer options last season. She played all 10 games. She had an average of 28.7 hitouts per game. She kicked the ball 7.4 times and very occasionally kicked a goal as well. Only had an average of 0.4, but does have the ability to go forward and kick a goal. She had the second highest average out of all the players from last year in my list. And I see much of the same for her again. She was a forward. She's moved into the ruck, but I don't think that's an issue for her. She was so good even as a forward, and her scores definitely compete with some of the best irrespective. And she's probably going to be one of my safer backup ruck options to my number 1. Ali Morfitt. The reason I have her at the number 1 is her upside is just so much higher than the rest that it just had to be number 1 for me. She had an average of 106 fantasy points last season. That is 17 more than the next closest in this list. It just was absolutely absurd. She is a dominant ruck, 29 hitouts per game on average and 11 kicks. I do know there was some scrutiny at some times of where those kicks were going with Morfitt. She does have a knack to just put the ball on the boot and spray it a little bit and isn't very effective with her disposals, but she's still a ball winner. She's still going to win the hitouts. And for me, doesn't matter where it goes. I just want those fantasy points. And we can see the +4, then I'm very happy. So Morfitt is taking out my number 1 ruck spot. I just see her being so dominant this year. And if she can crack triple digits again, which I think is very reasonable, she'll take out number 1, in my opinion. I can't believe he didn't have Morfitt at number 1. I was a little bit surprised, Bales, when I saw that.
Yeah, I wanted to put it at number 1. I had Edmonds just there, just based probably more on the fixtures, and I think that Edmonds will take that bit more of a step up and close the gap with Morfitt this year. So, it just looks weird that she's at number 3 on the screen. So, bloody Tom, mate, what are you doing?
Sorry. Well, let's get it off. Let's go to the forwards. We're going to go through our 10 to 6 ranked forwards and some crows on the screen. I know you love that. No Swannies. Very sad. Bales, take it away, mate. Talk through your 10 to 6 and why you're so high on them for the upcoming Women's Aussie Rules fantasy season.
Yeah, so I got Eden Zanker at number 10. We know she's obviously a very good goal scorer, and we've heard that Taylor Harris obviously making that move into defence this year. So I think that there's going to be a bit more reliance on Eden Zanker to be kicking those goals, and I think she's going to be a good option to plug and play on a particular week. So I like her. I've got Jack DePie at number 9. I think that, again, she's just such a strong presence in that Gold Coast forward line. She can chop out in the ruck as well. So I think that I just think she's a safe option. And the thing with the forwards, right, is that you got a top sort of 2, 3 or 4, but then it can fall away quite quickly. So it's going to be hard sort of which games to play them for. But I think Jack DePie is certainly a fairly safe player that you can play definitely as one of your sort of last forwards or on your bench there. I got Caitlin Gould at number 8. So we've obviously seen she's a good goal scorer in this role. She obviously was a ruck originally in a few of the Crows premiership years, and then she's moved more as a forward with the departures of Erin Phillips and Ash Saint the following year. So I think Caitlin Gould she's just going to continue to get better. She'll have that base of she'll chop out Jess Allen in the ruck, so she'll get a few hit outs, she'll get some touches up the ground, but then she'll also kick some goals up forward. And we know that goals is key in GameDay Squad. Obviously, get the extra couple of points with 8 points for every goal that you kick. So I think Caitlin Gould can get a few of those and go quite well. I've got Taylor Harris at 7. Obviously mentioned before with Eden Zanker about Melbourne. I think Taylor Harris is going into this defensive role, so she could easily be in the top 5. Just the only reason I've got her outside is I'm not sure how she's going to start. She obviously hasn't played in the practice games. She was at the Olympics, but she's also, I think she had an injury as well that she's been dealing with in the preseason. So that's the only reason she's a little bit lower, but I think she'll go quite well this year in this defensive role and put up some ceiling scores. And I've got Anya Tite, number 6, just, again, safe, reliable. She's so hard to sort of really play on because she's so agile for how tall she is. It's crazy. So I think just all these Irish women coming over that are really tall are just all real agile and really quick, which is funny. But I think Anya Ty's going to have a strong year, and she'll be a safe, solid player to put into your lineup each week.
For sure. Well, I do agree that Gould should be in the top 10. Look, if you look at her numbers from last season, wasn't, eye-popping. 62 fantasy points per game, 5 kicks, 3 handballs, 3 marks, and 7 hitouts that she can win. As you said, she had an average of 1.46 goals. She definitely spent a little bit more time forward and has the abilities to consistently hit the scoreboard. We're just going to need to see, and look, you don't ever want to wish this on someone, but, one injury and we could see Gould take a game to the next level if she's required to do a little bit more of the ruck work for the Crows this season and spends less time in the forward line. Then, wow, she could really become a good candidate for maybe a top 6 forward per round. But with the role that we presume that she's going to be playing most of the time on the forward line, sometimes as a ruck, then, I'm putting her at the number 10 spot, especially with her averages from last season. Kirsty Stratton, number 9 for me. I feel like this is one of the safest forwards you can play. She never really lulls down in terms of fantasy score, but she never really booms. She had an average of 70 fantasy points per game last season, 5 kicks, nearly 5 handballs, and 7 tackles. So she does like to get in amongst it, does love a cuddle, and it's very good for her fantasy score. And she's really safe. And if you want sort of that 70, 75 fantasy point mark, she's one of the better players in competition to put into that spot, especially as a forward. Depay, as you said, going to see some ruck work, average 6 hitouts per game last season. She's just really dominant. She just has those games where she's going to just outmark people and kick a bunch of goals because she's just one of the strongest and best forwards in the competition. And we're going to see it multiple times this year, especially in some green matchups. So I'm definitely, personally, going to be looking at some of the key forward matchups, going to be looking at some of the numbers and fantasy point averages against some squads, and of course be rolling out a Depay into my best 7 forwards in particular weeks. So if you want to know which weeks those are, subscribe to the channel and make sure you're here for our weekly show. We'll be running, and no Bales is going to have Depay in his squad as well at points this season. As you mentioned, Eden Zanker coming in here at number 7 for me. 7 kicks per game, 3 marks, 3 tackles, 76 fantasy points. And as you said, they're going to be reliant a little bit more on her this year. So I'm loving some of that upside. I feel like this is a good upside play. She's definitely has the opportunity to get her hands on the footy a little bit more, increase the disposal numbers, and hence increase her fantasy average. So I'm looking at that, hopefully going to get around that 80 fantasy mark more like. And you know what? If she can do that, she might crack into an all-star squad spot. But for me, my final spot here, number 6, Mariana Anthony. She had a fantastic year last year. Only played the 6 games, but in those 6 games, had an average of 73 fantasy points, 8.5 kicks, 4 handballs, 6 tackles. So she's going to get her hands on the footy. She's going to have opportunity to play. One thing that is a little bit of a concern for Anthony for me is time on ground at 72% in 2023. So in a 2024 campaign, she can spend a little bit more time on the ground. Of course, hopefully play a couple more games than the 6 she was only able to play last season. Then we're going to see a much better season from her in terms of output. And we're probably going to see her as an all-star forward come the end of this season. So they're my reasonings for her cracking into my top 10. Bales. This is it, mate. Our last set of rankings. Any surprises here? I want to know if you're still following along at home. Are you surprised by any of the ranks?
I'm surprised I'm actually surprised you don't have Courtney Hodder in your top 10. that's one that I'm probably surprised that you don't have. And I've sort of done, I did a bit of thinking today, and I probably, if I had my time again, I'd probably have my top four the way you've got it with Katie Brennan at 3 and Gemma Houghton at 4. But I think that they're both really good options. But Courtney Hodder, we saw how good she was in the grand final last year. I think she had like 18 tackles or something ridiculous like that. And
She dominated.
and I think that she's a player that I heard, and again, I heard Liam speak about this on the free kick pod, that I think in the games where they're under a bit more pressure, Brisbane, against the better teams, I think Courtney Hodder will go in there because of her tackling pressure and the pressure that she brings. So I think she's a really good play. And I've thankfully packed a bronze one today, which was good. So I'd be able to put her into the side and leave her there because I think she's going to be a really solid play throughout the year. I've got Katie Brennan at 4 and then Gemma Houghton at 3. As I mentioned, I could easily have Katie Brennan at 3 like you've got and then Gemma Houghton 4. I think Katie Brennan's got an easier start to the season. Gemma Houghton's got a better end to the season. So if that sort of splits it there, that's why for me that they're so close, like 3 and 4. But Katie Brennan, she's had a couple of injuries to deal with over the last couple of years, but seems to be fit and firing heading into the new season. Kicked 3 goals on the weekend, had 15 disposals as well. So I think Katie Brennan with a good start to the year is again another one that people are going to want to have in their squads. And Gemma Houghton at 3 got a trickier start to the season. Got the Crows in the first round, and then a few other sort of tricky matchups. But I think in the back half of the year she's got really good matchups. So if you don't have a Gemma Houghton to start, I'd try and get her before the second half of the season because you're going to want her in your squad by then. And I think the top 2 don't really need to. Again, a bit like the midfielders are the top 2 for a reason. We've got them in the same order there. I think Kate Hoare can even increase a little bit this year. We've been obviously hearing that she's going to be playing a little bit more midfield time, and that's what we've seen in the practice games as well. So I think that ceiling that she's already got could even be higher there. And then Bonnie Too Good. She's just too good, isn't she? I think that she's clearly the number 1 forward for me. And yeah, I think no matter where the ball is, she's just going to be there. She'll go behind the ball. I think she had a couple of CBAs as well as a midfielder, which is crazy. She's obviously forward, kicks goals, does everything. So thankfully I've got a gold, and I packed her pretty early last year, not knowing at the time how valuable it was going to be. But now that gold is arguably my most valuable player in the club, probably besides the Silver Marinoff that I've got. So Bonnie Too Good. If you don't have her in your side, I think she's probably the most important player besides Marinoff to have in your game day squad because of how much better she is than a lot of these other forwards, and because the top 2 I think are clearly above. But I think Bonnie Too Good's in like a tier of her own, and then Kate Hoare's in a tier of her own as well. Then you've got a Houghton and Brennan in another tier with maybe a Courtney Hodder and a couple of others. So they're my full rankings, mate. But those top 2 are very, very comfortable with heading into the season.
Love it. McTurtle, where can we find these rankings online? Well, we wanted to reveal our rankings and make it a little surprise for everyone watching along. So you actually can't right now. But if you do subscribe to GameDay Squad socials, we'll be posting our rankings tomorrow. So you can make sure you can go over them again, make sure you're ready to go for the season. And of course, hopefully you have a lot of these players in your GameDay Squad already, because we're free to play, we're free to win. And with our new starter competition, where you can enter with only bronze cards, you get a ton of them when you sign up. So good luck with opening them all. But I might come in reverse here. Just speaking of Too Good, she really lives up to the name and the expectation. She has a fantasy average of 120 per game, 14 kicks, just about 5 handballs, 6 marks, 5 tackles, 1.5 goals per game. They're her averages over the season. She truly does it all. There is no one that is as versatile and is as skillful as Bonnie Too Good in that sense in the entire competition. I sort of like your comment. For me personally, you said she's maybe the second most important card to have. I might put her at 3rd behind Garner, but I actually agree with her being a top 2 card that you must get for your squad this season. Because the difference between her and the forwards that are underneath her is just so large, and you don't really see that in many other positions in fantasy. Kate Hoare, though, I love that you mentioned the midfield minutes and the time she's going to get in there. She had a stellar year last year, about 100 fantasy point average per game, 92% time on ground with 11 kicks, 5 handballs, 4 marks, 4 tackles, 1.6 goals as well. We can see her kick goals in bunches, And if she's going to be playing in the midfield and resting forward, her fantasy upside is going to be just so much more. So second for me is really, really good in terms of her ranking, and I think is going to be pretty safe for the season that she's going to have, because in my opinion, I don't think it gets any worse. If anything, as you said, Bales, it only gets better than her 100 from last year, and that's going to secure her one of the top spots for sure. Katie Brennan, I just like her disposals. I think she gets her hands on the ball a little bit more than than Houghton and Ty that I have above there. As you said, she's probably going to have a really hot start to the year. This is a card that I currently don't have, and I'm hunting right now. And I'm hoping that in my packs I can get her every Monday.
Yeah, well, one thing I've noticed on the transfer market lately, actually just looking at sort of any trade offers and maybe looking at that and putting a few players myself on the market, is people are desperately looking for Bonnie Too Good, Kate Hoare, Gemma Houghton, and Katie Brennan, even Courtney Hodder bronzes. They're the top sort of 4 or 5 players I've seen people asking for, which is crazy that the people need these forwards, because obviously we know that it's probably the top 5 or 6 you really want, because you could lose points if you don't have some of these players, and other coaches have already got maybe a few of them.
Mate, couldn't agree more. It's definitely a lot of action looking for these players, and it's for good reason, because they're going to be some of the best forwards of the season. But Brennan had an 85 fantasy average last season. I'm expecting much more of the same from her, and why she's so good. Gemma Houghton, as you mentioned, a couple of tough matchups early on, but her upside and what she can score is so large. 92 fantasy point average last year, in a year where we did see her fluctuate up and down based off some worse matchups and some really good ones, but an average of 1.6 goals, 9 kicks, 4 handballs, and 5 tackles. She is an absolute stud of a forward to have in your squad, and is one you're going to want to start in many, many rounds this year. So make sure you have Gemma Houghton and Ty. Ty, for me, I think you said it quite well. Just her play style, it's like silky smooth, really like tall, dominant, and can take a grab. And that combination is pretty dangerous in front of goals, especially if you're going to be spending some time forward. I don't think it's a set and forget type of forward for me. This is one I'm going to be streaming through based off a matchup, but her upside is a lot bigger than maybe a Brennan and some of the people around her in my rankings. So definitely well deserving of the top 5 spot in my opinion. But we could see her creep into like the top 3 for scores per round and forwards at multiple points this year, which is why I probably value her a little bit more than maybe the other coach, because I'm looking at the upside and I think it's just so good, which is why she's snuck into my top 5. But beauty, mate, that wraps us up, our rankings for the season. What did you think? What do you think were some of the biggest people we missed out on, firstly, and maybe let us know who you would have put at some of those top spots if you were different. Bales, speaking of All-Stars, we've mentioned them at multiple points of this show. We're going to open up some packs and we're going to wrap this all up for this episode. So if you want a chance to win one of these All-Stars, we are doing a giveaway. Let me just stress again, you've got to subscribe to GameDay Squad's YouTube channel. You've got to sign up to make sure you signed up to Game Day, that you've set your squad name for the Women's Aussie Rules season, and make a comment on that video that we're doing right now, alive, or if you're seeing it in post-production of the video, your squad name, because we want to know, and leave a like on the video as well, and then you're entered. You can go back to last week's episode. We also did one. You can enter the same way, but you are limited to 1 entry per video we do, and we have another one coming out next week. But without further ado, Bales, let's get into it. Here are the All-Star packs here, a cheeky refresh to get us all going. Would you like to take the first pack or the second pack?
I'll take the second pack this week, I reckon.
Beautiful. I do like switching it up. I'm a superstitious man at that. Alrighty. Gold, silver. All right, let's go back to the other side. I'm not feeling that side. Gold, silver, same. Okay, fair enough. Gold, a silver, one last chance, please. Platinum.
There you go.
Platinum. Okay. Let's go through some of the silvers. We'll work our way up, I guess.
It's too actually, I might have to.
Antonio, got a bit of upside.
There you go. I had to put it fully on my screen so I can see the players.
Moody, can I zoom in maybe? Help you out a little. Oh, maybe not that much.
There you go. Yeah, that's good. I can read it now. Beautiful. Love it.
Let's go to golds.
Dewberry. Caitlin Gould,
Ooh.
gold. That's a solid one.
Stratton?
Stratton, who you had in your...
This is the forward pack, apparently.
Here's the platinum.
Here we go.
Hmm.
Not the platinum we're looking for, but it is okay. Bales, you have a chance at redemption for both of us here. That wasn't very great. We need everyone to know at home that there's some absolute heat in these, and you're going to lead us from the front here, Bales. Let's go.
Come on. Let's go. Ah, bugger. Not the animation we want. But if we can get some solid players.
Alrighty. Silver.
Okay.
Silver.
You can't get an all-star with that animation, can you?
I think you can, Bales. I don't think the all-star has a specific.
Okay, Mo, there is a bit of hope for us.
There's chance. Nothing higher than a gold, though, unless it is an all-star. Here we go.
No, nothing.
Not this time. Open up the silvers first.
Let's go. Yeah.
Oh,
Jack to Pie. I don't actually have one in my club, so that's a good one to start off with.
Oh, okay.
Claudia Whitford, that's not bad as well. Silver.
That's very good. Pound. Okay.
Yeah, Pound as a
you have some really solid options here, Bales. Let's finish it off.
Not a great finish, but hey, I'll take the silver, Jack DePie, Claudia Whitford, and Gab Pound. That's a few silvers that might plug and play, particularly Jack DePie as well.
For sure. I think you smoked me. If that was a pack battle and we had to go head to head, I wouldn't be doing too well. Bales, our next show is going to be next Wednesday. We just took you through our rankings. Wednesday, 8 p.m. We're going to have our last bit of preseason content, and then we're going to be starting off the season with our actual show where we're going to reveal our round 1 squads, Bales. I can't wait, mate. Thanks so much for tuning in, everyone at home. And yeah, we will see you next week. Make sure you get into the giveaway. All-Star Kate Hoare is being given out, so you have your chance to put it in a submission. Bales, any final comments you want to leave with everyone?
No, just look forward to the season. Obviously, we're only just over a week away. So this time, pretty much this time next week, we'll obviously be having our last show and then getting right into some AFLW action. So looking forward to it. Be a good season ahead. Yep. Subscribe to Fantasy Fanatics on YouTube, at BarrelsDT on X or Twitter as you